Thanks a lot, Mark. Well, I'll do my best to provide hope for what we have. So I'm going to juggle between the two screens as well, like Josh. So it's good to be here today. So at the NOC, first time in Southampton for me. And yeah, good to be able to attend the conference. So I'm not going to introduce myself much, as Mark just did it in a lovely manner, but just briefly. So I'm Falco and I work for Fauna and Flora, so a conservation wildlife organization. And today my talk is really going to focus on plastic pellets and more specifically policy that is going on in the field of plastic pellets and kind of how different policy frameworks are coming together really to tackle this large source of microplastic pollution. So first, the agenda of my presentation, I'll just give a quick overview of Fauna and Flora, so who I work for, the marine plastic program, so the work that we do, and then I really dive into the topic of the day. So giving an overview of plastic pellet loss across the supply chain and kind of trying to showcase the different initiatives that have been developed and are being developed in order to sort of address this source of pollution. And I'll touch a little bit as well on pollution preparedness as this conference is around spill response. And I'll finally end by how really we can put an end to pellet pollution. So with complementary mandatory measures coming together. So very briefly, Fauna and Flora, as I said, so it's a wildlife conservation organization. So we're based in the UK in Cambridge, but we work across the world with quite a few partners organizations. So our work is really all about protecting biodiversity. So with really the goal of ensuring that ecosystems are thriving, endangered species are protected, and that really local community around the world can really have a healthy environment to support their needs. So we work with a number of organizations really to drive changes in different space. So a lot in the policy world as well. So we're quite involved with corporates and governments, and we really always try to have a scientific evidence-based approach in order to find best solutions to the problem that communities around the world could be facing. And of course, plastic pollution, as Josh lovely introduced, is a threat to biodiversity, to people. So the Marine Plastics Program within Fauna and Flora was created in 2012, really with the goal of preventing sources of marine plastic pollution to reduce their impact on biodiversity. So we really work on upstream solutions, so really looking at tackling certain specific sources of pollution at source. So really with the view, as we often say, as like turning off the tap of this specific type of pollution. And so microplastics has been a key topic that we've been working on in recent years. So really with the goal of eliminating some direct sources of microplastic pollution. We've done a bit of work on the microplastic ingredient ban that took place a couple of years ago, microplastic fibers, and on plastic pellets. So I guess I don't really need to introduce pellet, but just very briefly, they are the industrial feedstock to produce almost all plastic items in existence. And as Josh showed, they're really present everywhere. And so due to a lot of mishandling of plastic pellet, it's estimated that it's the third largest source of microplastic pollution worldwide. So with up to an estimate of 445,000 tons leaking out of the global plastic supply chain. But these are just estimates because there is no current mechanism to really monitor losses around the world. And what we've been doing really at Fauna and Flora is trying to find effective solutions to the pellet problem. So really looking at what could be done to prevent pellets to enter the environment, first of all. So really looking at work with corporates, but also policy development. So as it was described in the previous presentation, this kind of infographic is just really to show again that plastic pollution, pellet pollution occurs at really every stage of the plastic supply chain. So during production, during preparation of pellet cargo, so when they're handled, when they're packaged, during all modes of transportation, so during the transport, for example, by rail and trucks, transport at sea, and also during operation of conversion and at recycling facilities as well. But yeah, what I just want to highlight here is that it's really a global problem. So it really occurs at every stage of the plastic pellet supply chain, these losses. And the losses can take several different forms, as Josh highlighted. So there could be chronic losses, so due to just day-to-day practices for example, as having the pellet bags that are just not well taken care and or that barely tear and few losses just occur on a day-to-day basis, but also under the form of acute spills, so larger spills. So that, for example, could be illustrated when there is a shipping incident and containers are lost and a huge amount of pellets washed up in the environment. And sorry, 1 second. And yeah, what I want to highlight then is that because pellet pollution is occurring at a global scale and across the supply chain, there's really a need for global action in order to prevent these losses at source. So what has happened so far in order to prevent pellet loss? Well, as losses really occur during all modes of transport, well, pellet pollution industry tried to tackle pellet pollution through different schemes, but such as the Operation Clean Sweep scheme that you might have heard about. But yeah, something to highlight is that pellet pollution is not a consumer-facing issue like we have, for example, with plastic bottles or element that we buy. It's really an industry problem. So that is really due to basically supply chain-wide systemic failures to really implement prevention loss measures. And so what has happened? It's really not a new topic, because since basically we've started to use plastics, so more than 50 years ago, we've been starting to see pellet losses. So I think there were some studies that have recorded like the first pellet loss in like the early 1970s. So basically, the fact that we know that there is losses and that they're still occurring nowadays mean that the problem has really been ignored or overlooked for many years. In order to tackle this problem, the plastic industry has tried to put in place a different number of initiatives, so often voluntary and so industry-led, as up here with the Operation Clean Sweep scheme. And so Operation Clean Sweep, just to give a really quick background on this, it's basically a sort of guidance for businesses of different size that handle pellets in different ways, in order to help them improve their handling, practices, and really prevent the loss of pellet. And under the scheme, so the signatory companies, they kind of pledge to improve they improve their operation, and that they train their employees in order that they limit spills. But what we've seen so far since the implementation of this scheme, so like in the early 1990s, is that it's not really well implemented across the different industries that handle plastics, and often the scheme itself is not really robust enough. So that basically leads to continuous loss of plastic pellets still happening, even in the companies that are signatories under the scheme. So that really has kind of highlight that these voluntary initiatives, so industry-led initiative, are not enough, and that there is really a need for more stronger, robust, overarching regulation to really prevent pellet loss in all across the industry practices. But yeah, if the good news though is that a study published a couple of years ago by me if I'm not wrong, has showed that if there is sound pellet loss prevention measures put together in order to really ensuring that that across the entire supply chain, these measures are like maintained, monitored, and monitored for effectiveness, then pellet loss pollution could really be reduced by up to 95%, which is really huge. And that's why at Falco, when we've been kind of then looking at the issue, we're like, well, if this prevention measure needs to happen, and basically global legislation really offers a unique opportunity to really start tackling this problem. So now I'm gonna dive in a little bit in what different initiatives has taken place to try to regulate pellet loss across the world. So in recent years, and so in response to increased recognition of the impact of plastic pellet pollution to the environment, there's been a number of national, regional, and international regulators that have kind of explored and introduced different measures in order to tackle plastic pellet loss. So, for example, the need for comprehensive action on pellet was recognized by the OSPAR Convention. Who developed coordinated action, who basically placed plastic pellet at the heart of their action plan in 2014 And from this, so by having different member states from the Northeast Atlantic coming together, OSPA in 2021 adopted recommendation to really reduce plastic pellet loss into the maritime environment. So by requiring the timely development and implementation of effective and consistent pellet loss prevention measures. So basically through the elaboration of standard and certification scheme for the entire plastic supply chain. So the only thing was that these were recommendations, but they really managed to catalyze then other policy development on the national levels, for example. So in France, in a similar effort to tackle pollution, France issued a decree in 2021 so to address the loss of plastic pellet from sites producing, handling, transporting pellets. And they've done this under the environmental code. And that was really that was a really great step forward to see a country really committing to address this form of pollution. And so the French, in their national legislation, they obliges industrial operators to prevent dispersion of pellets to the environment. However, so this legislation is only the scope of this legislation is missing out on quite a few of the plastic industry operators. So because it only looks at companies operating with a certain tonnage of pellets. So that's why even though it's great that it has been developed, it showed that more had to be done. And yeah, so it was a great first effort from France to develop this. But thankfully, they were also able to push further development with other countries, so within the European Union. So building on the commitments that the EU plastic strategy has to reduce, so that it was an intentional release of microplastic in the marine environment. And in parallel, so to the different OSPAR and French development that happened, the European Commission started a policy process a couple of years in 2022 in order to tackle pellet pollution, and this led at the end of 2023 to the release of a policy proposal, so to really regulate plastic pellet loss. And that policy proposal, as I'm speaking right now, is currently being reviewed at the EU. So the way that the EU process work is that once the Commission sends out a policy proposal, then it has to go through the EU Parliament, and afterwards has to go to the EU Council, which then review the policy text, either change something on it, but it's really great to see that a regional let's say effort is really happening at the EU, and that basically, even there's still a lot of work to do in order to finalize this regulation, and we still need to see what the ambition of this regulation is going to be, because there's a lot of pushback from the industry in order to develop it. But this is really a great first step to really address this form of pollution in the EU, which is really a huge hub also for pellet movement. But yeah, I think like, to really complement these kind of national, regional effort, there has to be some international effort going on. And so building on this rising support for pellet regulation, so following multiple large-scale maritime spills, as you could find, for example, on some of the little infographics that I've put on the table today, the International Maritime Organization, so to better regulate the shipping of plastic pellets, started a policy process in 2022, so where they're looking basically at reducing the environmental risk associated with the carriage of pellets, so by freight containers. And this was really fantastic news, as currently there is no regulation at the global level on plastic pellets, so nothing at all exists at an international level. And the IMO, so through their work, really launched this, what could be this first international way to regulate pellet loss across different countries and across the sea as well. So because the sea is not regulated by individual country. And so far, so as a first step, what the IMO did, so across during their process during the last years, that they developed first some voluntary guidelines, so voluntary recommendation that country could implement in their country. So where they basically try to provide information in order so that the shipping companies in the country could improve the storage of pellets on the ship, the packaging requirement as well for pellets, and also the kind of notification of pellet, because currently there is no notification of pellets when they are transported on ships. And as the next step, the IMO is now entering that next phase, which is what we often refer to the development of mandatory measure or mandatory instruments. So they've been looking at different potential instruments, and at the next PPR meeting, so when they resume early next year, we expect the mandatory discussion to move forward, and if they succeed, so these recommendations, they will likely address the maritime transport of pellets, so really bringing some mandatory measure on the maritime transport, which really then could play a key role in improving losses of pellets from lands as well, because of this interconnectivity of the pellet supply chain. So across like the maritime sector and then the land sector where they're all connected. I mean, we could see it here in Southampton Port, just walking this morning to the conference. You could see that ships are arriving right here, and then you've got rail that then just go from the shipyard straight to the land, where they can then bring pellets to the different factories. And if there were to be some strong regulation at the IMO, then that could be under the form, for example, of better packaging. Then other sector of the supply chain would then be positively impacted by these changes. And so the development of the IMO work, like the policy development at the IMO, could really be complementary also with other international policy development, such as the developments of the United Nations Global Plastic Treaty. So I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this plastics treaty, but the UN has started a process in 2022 to develop an internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, basically with the goal of ending plastic pollution worldwide. So it's a huge challenge, and we've seen during the different session of development of a treaty that there is still a lot of work to do. But the good point with this treaty development is that so far plastic pellet is included in the first draft of the treaty. So what will form the basis of the legally binding instrument once it's finalized and ratified and adopted by many countries. So we really are working closely at Falco with negotiators in order to keep that pellet element within the treaty, because that could really the treaty, so if well developed and implemented afterwards, if it includes like plastic pellets requirement for all countries, that could really work as an overarching framework, so to ensure that there is a harmonized and global approach on pellet loss prevention measure, and that could really complement these other policy that we've been discussing, so like the IMO, the European regional policy work, and other efforts that are also going around the world that I didn't even include here, but there's quite a few other efforts as well. So really, all these policy development that I've touched on, they are all playing a key role towards the establishment of better pellet loss prevention measures, and they're all complementary. But it's really key that they all move together. So in a way, without relying on each other's development, so they all have to work towards addressing plastic pellets the best as possible within their kind of the framework. However, they should really all be talking between each other in order to ensure that the policy that comes out of these different processes really are as effective as possible and as complementary as possible. So that's also something that at Falco we really try to bring together these different policies in order so that they are the most complementary as possible. Yeah, so that was a lot of presentation on, let's say, what we call so prevention of pellet loss, and because this is what basically at Falco we're working on, really the prevention work, the upstream measures in order to reduce this form of pollution. However, we're well aware that even with the best measures in place, there can still be incidents, so that leads to the loss of pellets into the environments, so which really clearly highlight that there is still a need for pollution preparedness in the case of pellet spills. So once pellets enter the environment, so they are highly mobile, very difficult to clean up. And often in the case of spill disaster, so with acute pollution events, the authorities have reported so limited experience to really support effective containment or cleanup. And also there is often a lack of clarity around what the authorities are responsible for responding to pollution of this nature. And worldwide, when we look at a global level, there's really a limited training or assessment of effectiveness of suitability of the cleanup methods that currently exist. So one process that has been moving forward with the cleanup guidelines is the International Maritime Organization work. So they have issued a sort of good practice guidance, so that really relates to the cleanup of plastic pellets, kind of giving a state of art of what cleanup methods exist. And this is really a good start toward designing, let's say, clear response, like a prevention risk, like preparedness in the case of the cleanup of plastic pellets. But this effort must really continue and really go a step further to really ensure that there is a real clear development of mandatory and agreed disaster response protocol globally. So with countries that would then be really obliged to implement these protocols, including notification, training programs to aid pollution preparedness, and then have a really ensure that the response is improved to a level that is like as best as possible to really respond effectively in the case of spills. And then to us as a biodiversity conservation organization, so as Fauna and Flora, it's quite important that all cleaning methods really takes into account the ecological sensitiveness of the environment. And I know that there's quite a lot of organizations in the room that are working towards like the remediation of spills. So being someone that is pretty, let's say, new to the spill response topic, more on the prevention aspect, I would really be keen to hear from the people in the audience on if this aspect of ecological sensitiveness comes up a lot when you have spill response and when you develop your protocol in order to respond to spill, and or if this is something that you kind of trying to bring into your current practices on the later stage, because while we really agree that when there is this huge quantity of plastic in the environment, that they must be retrieved because they just have so much negative impact on communities and biodiversity. But there is also that sort of limit in terms of like, at what level do we keep cleaning up? As we see like here just on this picture, plastic pellets, when they're lost in the environment, they just get mixed with all these different organic matter. And some of this organic matter play a key role just in terms of ecosystem stability, providing houses for small organism, food. So there should really be a sort of thought approach, I think, in order to really ensure that cleanup protocols are built as best as possible and in a way that they really take into account the ecological sensitiveness. So yeah, together, so with this disaster response protocol, we also think that there should be really some mechanism for accountability. So in the case of historic, future, and ongoing pellet loss, so with really an equitable access to compensation remediation for those impacted, basically because a lot of community around the world, as Josh has shown in Sri Lanka, who depends on a healthy environment to live for tourism, they sometimes don't have any form of compensation when spills like that happen, or it's not really clearly established. There's really a need to ensure that there is a clear mechanism for this accountability. So all these elements should really all be considered in the development of global regulation, really to effectively tackle pollution from land and sea. And just to finish, I'd like to just give a little overview on what ending pellet pollution would look like if all the policy framework comes together. So at Fauna and Flora, so we're calling for a series of complementary measures based on a supply chain approach. And a supply chain approach basically means that every company, so regardless of size or location across the whole plastic supply chains, are all required to prevent pellet loss prevention measures. And this a mandatory obligation, so on the whole supply chain, will really ensure that no individual company or sector is disadvantaged by behaving responsibly. And that will ensure consistency, transparency, and continuity in practices that would really make pellet a thing of the past. And as mentioned earlier, so pellet loss prevention measures, so if they're well implemented, could reduce plastic pellet pollution by 95%. So policymakers through different policies, as I've shown here, could really have an immediate positive impact by passing legislation that sets a mandatory requirement for all pellet handlers across the supply chain. So ensuring that pellet loss prevention extend beyond those voluntary kind of practices that are only existing currently. And that will really ensure that all businesses are held accountable to the same level of performance, and that could provide really formal mechanism for enforcement of agreed best practice and the means for monitoring compliance of these best practice. So yeah, as a conclusion, there's loads of efforts going on currently to tackle plastic pellet loss. Still a lot to be done in all these different policy frameworks, but we really want to frame that possibility that if efficient prevention measures are implemented, plastic pellet loss could become a thing of the past. So solution to the problem must really be applied in a holistic, coordinated and complementary fashion, and really across both land and sea, and really tackling as well chronic and acute losses. So yeah, that's it for me, and thanks a lot for your attention.
Two things. I would say there is actually some good documentation which is available, and any stakeholders should read a document called PAS 510. It's a publicly accessible standard, and if companies in the supply chain followed it, it would achieve Falco's goal and it would achieve a goal for the environment. But the question is, it's not mandatory. And hopefully that we will find that it will become mandatory. And I know Heather's nodding her head because she would certainly love that to happen.
Thanks
I think all of us in the room would. Second thing is on sustainability endpoints, and this is just something which is one of our unfinished goals, because we haven't really got agreement on what they should be. But one of the discussions this afternoon at when is it 14:15 will be in that half-an-hour slot to try to discuss it and actually agree that we should run with certain sustainability endpoints, such that there's no point pursuing the very last hurdle if actually you're destroying the ecological environment around that hurdle. So thank you, Falco. That was very great. That was really good. Yeah. Falco is around all day, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm around all day. Please feel free to come and have a chat if you wish to learn more about plastic pellet pollution. I mean, we've got a lot of information on our website as well. But yeah, really happy to chat with everyone. And as I said, like I'm new to the spill response thing, so really would love to hear a bit more on the cleanup aspect as well, what you're doing.
That's great.
But,
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mark.